Evaluate how the tragedy of the commons demonstrates a failure of shared resource management in human societies.
The tragedy of the commons often shows failure because when people share a resource, everyone takes what they want, and then the resource over time gets overused or damaged. And it's because people often act for themselves instead of acting for the entire group. So an example of this would be the overfishing of Atlantic cod, which happened because of too many people using the same resource, and they just kept fighting over it, which causes it to get overused.
Propose one policy or community strategy that could prevent the outcome in a modern context.
A strategy to prevent this would be to set usage limits. So, for example, fishing quotas have helped fishing populations recover in parts of the North Atlantic. So instead of one person getting 10 fish, their limit could be like 5 fish per person. So instead of 3 people going fishing and they each get 10 plus, that would be 30 plus fishes gone. So it would be way more harder for their population to recover. Rather than if one person is limited to only 5 fish, half of that would be gone. So the fish population would have more time to recover since there's less fish being overfished.
Assess how clear cutting provides short-term benefits but undermines long-term ecosystem services.
Okay. Clear cutting gives quick timber, but it harms the ecosystem long-term because it causes soil erosion, which destroys habitats, lowering biodiversity, and it disrupts the water cycles. So, for example, clear cutting in the Pacific Northwest has reduced habitats for species like the red-spotted owl.
Suggest one sustainable forestry method that could protect biodiversity while maintaining resource access.
So selective cutting is better because only some trees are removed, which keeps habitats healthier. So for example, forests in Oregon often uses selective cutting to protect their biodiversity. So that way you're not taking out the whole thing and they're less likely to get taken out by diseases. So if some mass disease were to happen that takes out all of white oak trees, you'd have more trees in your forest than you would if all your trees were white oak and they'd all get wiped out by some disease.
Analyze how the Green Revolution reshaped agricultural efficiency and environmental health on a global scale.
The Green Revolution increased its food production using fertilizers, pesticides, irrigation, and high-yield crops, but it's caused soil degradation, water pollution, and the loss of biodiversity over time. So, for example, heavy fertilizers used in India led to nutrient pollution into their waterways because of all the runoff from the farms.
Defend whether or not the overall legacy of the Green Revolution is positive for the environment.
Overall, it had more of a negative environmental impact because chemicals and all the uses of monoculture has harmed the ecosystems. So, for example, the widespread of one type of wheat was reduced, and so one type of the wheat reduced their genetic diversity.
Compare the environmental trade-off between traditional and modern farming practices such as tilling, fertilizer use, or slash and burn.
Traditional farming protects the biodiversity, but it can cause soil erosion or carbon release. So when slash and burn is used in the Amazon, modern farming increases yields, but it uses fertilizers and pesticides that can pollute your water and soil. So nitrogen runoff creating dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico would be a great example of that.
Recommend one innovative solution that could balance productivity and sustainability.
Precision agriculture is good because it uses technology to apply only the needed amount of water or fertilizer, which produces the amount of pollution that you could potentially get. So, for example, many of the U.S. corn farms use GPS fertilizer systems.
Examine how irrigation practices affect both local water resources and soil health.
Irrigation affects the water resources and soil health. Flood irrigation wastes water. It can cause the soil salination. So, parts of California Central Valley would be a great example of that. And it's also an efficient method to protect soil and conserve the water that's there.
If you were designing a farm in an arid region, justify which irrigation method you would choose and why.
I would choose drip irrigation because it delivers water directly to the roots and it reduces evaporation. So instead of like water just sitting on the surface of the soil because it may not have like a high permeability or something like that, the water won't evaporate if it's like a hot sunny day, versus if it goes directly to the roots, there's not a huge chance of it evaporating since it's in the soil and the roots can directly slurp it up. So an example of that would be Israel using drip irrigation successfully during their dry climate times.
Evaluate how pesticide resistance evolves and how it affects global food security.
Pesticide resistance evolves when pests survive chemicals and pass on resistant genes. So over time, the pesticide will stop working. And many examples of this is how insects, like many insects, can become resistant to DDT. This hurts the food security because crops become harder and harder to protect. So many farmers are going to have issues when it comes to their like certain seasons of foods, and they won't make as much profit. So their economic like factor of it will go down.
Propose an integrated approach that minimizes resistance while maintaining crop yields.
Okay. Integrated pest management, or IPM, is best because it uses biological controls, crop rotation, and limited pesticide use. So for example, ladybugs are like used to control the aphids in IPM systems.
Analyze the environmental, economic, and ethical trade-off between CAFOS and free-range grazing systems.
CAFOs are cheap and efficient, but it can cause pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, so like the methane from cattle feedlots in the Midwest. Free-range systems support biodiversity but need more land and often cost more.
Predict how reducing global meat consumption might reshape ecosystems and resource use.
Reducing meat consumption would lower emissions and protect ecosystems. So, for example, less beef demand could reduce deforestation in the Amazon.
Assess how overfishing alters marine food webs and impacts human economies.
Okay. Overfishing removes too many fish too fast, so it disrupts many of the marine food webs. So, for example of this would be the Atlantic cod populations crashed from overfishing in the Atlantic Ocean because of all the overfishing happening, and it disrupts all their food webs, and the fish just don't have enough time to recover.
Design one international policy that could help sustain fisheries for future generations.
International catch quotas and marine protected areas would help sustain many fisheries. So, for example of this would be Australia's Great Barrier Reef Marine Park protects their fish populations from all the overfishing, and their fish populations can thrive in their own environments and really reach their maximum capacity.
Explain how mining operations both fuel economic development and degrade natural systems.
Mining supports the economy by providing minerals and jobs. So like coal minings in West Virginia provide minerals from the mines and then jobs to people who live and are located in West Virginia. But it often degrades the natural systems through habitat destruction, soil erosion, and water contamination like acid mine drainage. So it's not very great environmentally.
Evaluate which solution, technological innovation, regulation, or community action could most effectively reduce these impacts.
Technological innovation is most effective because it can reduce pollution and recycle water during mining. So, for example, new filtration systems can help clean wastewater from mines so you don't have much pollution going into your waterways, which if it gets into your waterways and you drink that contaminated water, you can die, and it's not going to be great for you because of all those chemicals inside of your water, and all that acid mine water is just not great for you.
Examine how urban growth influences the carbon and hydrologic cycles on a regional scale.
Urban growth increases carbon emission and changes the hydrologic cycle by increasing the runoff amount and reducing the groundwater recharge. So, for example, cities like Houston have major flooding because of the paved surfaces and because it prevents infiltration, because often soil, the water will infiltrate and it'll like filter out a lot of the pollutants and causing your water to be more clean, because they're able to get some of the pollutants out of the water and it'll be more better for you to drink, if that makes sense.
Propose a city planning strategy that could make urban areas more resilient to environmental change.
So the green infrastructure helps cities adapt to environmental change. So, for example, New York City has many green roofs and permeable pavement to reduce the amount of runoff. So that way, and what I mean by the permeable pavement is that the water is able to get through the pavement, because permeability is the amount of water flow that can go through it. So it allows for the water to go through the concrete and into, or not like through the pavement and into the soil where it can infiltrate, and it'll reduce the amount of runoff that gets into our waterways. So it'll be, if it does make it to the waterways, it'll be nice and filtered by then, but the chances of it's not that great.